The 2013 announcement was a masterclass in misdirection. When the CIA finally admitted that Area 51 existed, the world exhaled. They showed grainy photos of the U-2 spy plane and the belly of the ox cart. It was a neat package, wrapped in the banner of national security, designed to convince the public that the mystery was over. They wanted us to believe that the flashing lights in the desert were merely Cold War technology. But for Dr. Elias Thorne, those documents were nothing more than a controlled burn, a small fire set to stop a larger truth from consuming the forest. Elias lived in a weathered shack on the edge of the Nevada wasteland, far enough from Las Vegas to see the stars, but close enough to the Groom Lake perimeter to feel the vibration of engines that shouldn't exist. A veteran physicist, with hands that once manipulated the fabric of the universe, he now lived in self-imposed exile. His skin was leathered by the desert sun, his eyes perpetually squinting as if looking for something on the horizon that he hoped would never arrive. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The silence was shattered at 3 a.m. His workstation, a relic of the 80s patched together with modern encryption, let out a piercing rhythmic chirp. It was a dead man's switch. The sender was a name Elias hadn't spoken in years, a colleague who had supposedly perished in a freak accident at the site. The message was brief, a ghost reaching out from the digital ether. It contained a single link to a hidden directory, titled with a phrase that made Elias's blood run cold, Project Spectre. As the data crawled onto his screen, Elias felt the crushing weight of his past. He thought of Sarah. His daughter was only 10 when she first complained of headaches. Within months, she was gone, her body ravaged by an aggressive leukemia. Elias knew the source. He had seen the black smoke billowing from the open burn pits at the base where classified documents and experimental chemicals were incinerated. The government denied everything, citing national security to withhold the medical records that might have saved her. His quest was now about the redemption of a father who had remained silent while his world burned. The Spectre files were the antithesis of the 2013 declassification. While the official papers spoke of jet propulsion, these memos whispered of non-terrestrial physics and anti-gravity drives. One memo detailed a 1988 test flight that achieved instantaneous acceleration, a feat that would have liquefied a human pilot. It suggested that the U-2 program was merely a shroud, a mundane cover story for a project that was reverse engineering something that was never meant to be found on Earth. Elias wasn't the only one watching. Miles away, in a sterile room, Agent Miller sat in the blue glow of his monitors. Miller was a cleaner, a man dedicated to making sure the wrong people never asked the right questions. He watched the data packets transfer to Elias's remote address. He didn't rush. He was a predator who enjoyed the hunt. He adjusted his tie, his expression as cold as the desert floor at midnight. The containment protocol had been breached, and Miller knew exactly how to handle leaks. Elias scrolled deeper, his breath hitching as he found an image file dated November 12, 1994. The date was an impossibility. The secret programs were supposed to have ended years prior. The photograph was high resolution, clearer than any shared on conspiracy forums. It showed a craft suspended in a hangar, a shimmering, seamless obsidian teardrop that seemed to warp the light around it. There were no rivets or seams. It was a vessel that defied every law of human physics Elias had ever taught. It was undeniable proof that the 2013 files were a lie, and that the truth was still buried deep in the sand. The faces of the forgotten workers haunted Elias more than any technological marvel. These men hauled lead-lined crates and breathed the prismatic smoke rising from the burn pits. They were the janitors of the impossible, laborers who developed strange tremors and respiratory failures that no doctor could explain. When they asked for medical records, the government handed them redacted pages, citing security. Those with the highest security clearances looked away as the sickness spread through the residential compounds. Elias had seen it happen dozens of times, but his own complicity was the wound that would never heal. He remembered Sarah's final fever. He had been in a pressurized briefing room listening to generals discuss trajectories while his daughter's body failed her. He had signed the non-disclosure agreements with a steady hand, choosing the mission over his child because he believed he was protecting the world. He had traded his soul for a security clearance. The realization tasted of copper. His journey led him to a lonely derelict diner at the edge of the Tonopah Range, where the wind howled through rusted signs. The diner smelled of stale coffee and fear, a sanctuary for those the desert had tried to swallow. The whistleblower sat in a corner booth, his face obscured by the shadow of a grease-stained baseball cap. He was a former archivist who filed the state's sins for 3 decades. He didn't speak of lights in the sky. He spoke of the Gray Archives, a physical site buried in a decommissioned silver mine far off the official maps. The old man's hand shook as he pushed a folded napkin across the table with the coordinates. "The digital age is too easy to erase," the man whispered, his voice trembling. "If you want the truth, you have to touch the paper. Look for the Janus Protocol." Elias found the archives under the cover of a moonless night. The entrance was a steel door hidden by tailings, but inside was a cathedral of secrets. He could hear the distant hum of a ventilation system, a mechanical heart beating in the ribs of the earth. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into the darkness, containing the physical evidence of 50 years of deception. This was his last chance at redemption, an opportunity to speak for those who could no longer breathe. He pulled a heavy folder from a drawer marked with a triple red stripe. The Janus Protocol was a revelation of pure horror. It wasn't just about reverse engineering propulsion. It was a secret directive to weaponize recovered biological and chemical debris. The project was so deeply compartmentalized that even the President of the United States was kept in the dark, bypassed by a shadow cabinet. "You were always too curious for your own good, Elias." The voice was calm, coming from the end of the aisle. Agent Miller stepped into the pale light of Elias's flashlight, his suppressed pistol held ready. Miller's eyes remained fixed on Elias, devoid of any malice but filled with a terrifying bureaucratic certainty. Miller's accountant-like appearance made his words chilling. He revealed the truth. The toxins that killed Sarah weren't an accident. They were the very byproduct of the atmospheric scrubbing systems Elias himself had designed in the 80s. His research into propellants created the carcinogenic plume that drifted over the housing. He had unknowingly built the weapon that killed his daughter. The government had sacrificed its people to fuel its ambitions, and Elias had provided the matches. Grief suddenly hit Elias like a blow, replaced by a cold fury. He grabbed an encrypted drive and lunged for the exit. Miller fired. The sound was a sharp cough. Elias felt the impact, but it wasn't in his flesh. He stumbled into the harsh desert night, the drive clutched to his chest. Miller's silhouette remained motionless in the doorway. Elias saw the jagged entry hole in the metal casing. Sparks flickered as the data began to corrupt. The truth was leaking away into the thirsty sand, and the hunt had only just begun now. The engine of Elias's truck screamed as he pushed toward the silhouette of the old radio tower. The rusted mast pierced the Nevada sky like a needle, a relic of a time when the desert was used for voices instead of silences. The encrypted drive in his pocket felt like a dying coal, its circuits humming with the final, fragile remnants of the Janus Protocol. As he drove, he managed to link his tablet to the drive's faltering interface one last time. The screen flickered with a grainy recording from 1957. It wasn't a weapon, it was a tragedy. He saw a landing craft, elegant and white, and human delegates standing in the dust. Then, the fire started. It wasn't an attack from the stars, it was a panicked ambush from the ground. The government hadn't been protecting the world from a threat. They had been covering up a cosmic murder. Thousands of lives were the collateral damage of a 50-year cover-up to hide that original sin. The blood-red sun was sinking behind the Tonopah Range, staining the desert floor in shades of bruised purple and crimson. Elias reached the base of the tower just as the headlights of Miller's SUVs appeared on the horizon, cutting through the rising dust like predatory eyes. The drive was dying, damaged by Miller's bullet. The only way to punch the signal through the base's heavy electronic jamming was to use the tower's high-altitude manual transmitter. He began to climb, the cold steel rungs biting into his hands. His breath came in ragged gasps, his aged muscles screaming, but he didn't look down. Every foot of elevation was a step away from the lies he had told himself for 30 years. At the summit, the wind howled, threatening to rip him from the mast. Elias pulled the tablet out and patched it into the tower's antiquated manual override. Below, the black vehicle screeched to a halt. Agent Miller stepped out, his movements methodical and devoid of haste. He didn't shout. He simply raised his long-range rifle, the barrel glinting in the dying light. Elias ignored the threat, focusing on the interface. He rerouted the tower's power, bypassing the digital jammers by using the old frequencies he had helped calibrate during his tenure at Groom Lake. With a final trembling tap on the screen, he initiated the upload. "It is over, Miller," Elias whispered, his voice lost to the gale. The progress bar was a thin line of blue light against the deepening dark. It moved with agonizing slowness. 60%, 80, 95. The data was no longer just his burden. It was a flood cascading into the servers of global news agencies and independent journalists. The Janus Protocol and the truth of Sarah's death were finally free. Elias pulled a worn photograph of Sarah from his jacket. Looking at her face in the fading light, he felt a profound, quiet peace. He had finally given her the voice he had denied her while she lived. As police helicopters appeared on the horizon, the world began to react. The revelations of Project Spectre rippled across every continent, sparking a firestorm of questions that no amount of declassification could ever quench. The wall of secrecy that had stood for decades now had a permanent, jagged crack. Elias sat back against the steel, closing his eyes as searchlights swept the tower. He was a man who had finally traded his security clearance for his soul. Yet, miles away, in a section of the desert that appeared on no map, a new construction project hummed with life. Deep beneath the pristine sand, a hydraulic door slid shut on a room filled with fresh filing cabinets. A man in a dark suit placed a new folder on an empty desk. The label read Project Phoenix. The government had already shifted its shadow, building a new fortress upon the ashes of the old. The cycle was starting again, hidden away from the prying eyes of a world that thought it finally knew the truth.